There is a massive systemic lie told about the empath early in life, and it is a lie that almost every single one of them buys into for years. People consistently mistake deep sensitivity for fundamental fragility. When you are a highly perceptive child, the world looks at your intensity, your deep feelings, and your tendency to absorb the emotional climate around you, and they label it as weakness. They see someone who feels too much, cares too easily, and supposedly breaks too often. Because this narrative is repeated by parents, teachers, and peers, the young empath internalizes it. You grow up genuinely believing you are flawed, too soft for a harsh world, and carrying a psychological defect that makes you vulnerable to everyone else's whims. You spend the first chapters of your life wishing you could turn down the volume of your own mind, completely unaware that what you are actually carrying is a rare, calibrated power in its rawest form. The truth that nobody tells you is that this early emotional pain isn't damage. It is a brutal, master-level training ground. Empaths do not grow up in environments of peaceful predictability or emotional ease. They are almost always forged in environments marked by subtle tension, instability, unpredictable moods, or chaotic dynamics. In a household or a childhood like that, learning to read the emotional room wasn't a personality trait or a polite social habit. It was absolute survival. When the adults or the environment around you are unpredictable, your safety depends entirely on your ability to predict them. You didn't become highly sensitive by accident. You were forced to develop an advanced internal radar just to navigate the daily terrain of your youth. Because of this intense training ground, you learn to scan facial expressions and decode the microscopic shifts in a person's tone of voice long before you even had the vocabulary to explain what you were doing. While other children were simply playing and moving through life unburdened, the young empath was actively tracking the unseen currents of human psychology. You could feel a storm brewing in a room the exact second you walked through the door, sensing the heavy, unsaid tension between people, even if they were smiling and pretending everything was fine. You became hyper-aware of the painful friction between what people said out loud versus what they were actually feeling inside. You were forced to master the nuances of human behavior at a level most ordinary people never consciously achieve in their entire lifetimes, turning a chaotic childhood into an invisible, lifelong masterclass in psychological insight. What looks on the surface like pointless childhood suffering is actually a process where raw pain quietly sharpens into a hyper-awareness so precise it borders on a superpower. This constant emotional friction forces the empath to grow up way too fast, pushing them into a state of deep existential questioning while others are still playing games. You are forced to live inside heavy, exhausting questions that most people avoid for decades. Who is actually safe to trust? What is real beneath the layers of appearances people wear? What does it take to protect my peace when the world is chaotic? You don't analyze these questions from a safe distance or debate them intellectually like a philosopher in a book. You live them out in the raw, bleeding reality of your everyday life. You wrestle with them in your chest during sleepless nights, searching for answers not in abstract academic theories, but in the brutal, lived emotional experiences that permanently alter who you are. This grueling process is the exact reason why older empaths carry an unusual, heavy kind of wisdom that stops people in their tracks. They didn't borrow their insights from a self-help quote, and they didn't inherit them through an easy life. They bought every single ounce of their wisdom with currency made of heartbreak, letdowns, and sheer survival. When you repeatedly survive emotional chaos, gaslighting, or betrayal from the very people who were supposed to protect you, a profound psychological shift takes place. You don't just walk away wounded, you get refined. The fire of those experiences burns away your naivete. It forces an internal development that transforms your entire worldview, teaching you how to look past the surface of human behavior and see exactly what is happening underneath. Over time, this intense refinement allows you to instantly separate the superficial noise from the absolute truth. You stop listening to what people say and start tracking what they actually do. You learn to spot the massive gulf between an engineered charm and genuine moral character. And you become entirely immune to a polished performance because you are busy looking at a person's underlying sincerity. These distinctions aren't just thoughts. They are a highly advanced form of emotional and psychological intelligence. While the world thinks intelligence is only measured by logic or calculations, the empath develops a much rarer intelligence, born directly through hardship. What began in your youth as a crippling hyper-awareness and often manifested as severe social anxiety or a nervous system on constant high alert, matures into an elite, unstoppable level of human pattern recognition. You become a living, breathing lie detector, completely rewritten by the very struggles that were meant to break you. The definitive turning point in an empath's life never happens when things are easy. It happens at the absolute rock bottom of emotional burnout, when total exhaustion suddenly transforms into a massive psychological revelation. For the first half of their lives, young empaths live under a deeply toxic illusion. They genuinely believe that love requires endless accommodation, total self-sacrifice, and the complete erasure of their own needs. Because your radar is so highly attuned to everyone else's discomfort, you fall into the trap of confusing empathy with personal responsibility. You mistakenly assume that if you have the unique ability to feel another person's pain, sadness, or anger, it means you are automatically obligated to step in, carry it for them, and fix it. You become a psychological janitor, cleaning up emotional messes you didn't make, entirely consumed by the heavy burden of keeping everyone around you comfortable, stabilized, and happy. This codependent mindset forces you into a degrading cycle where you constantly over-explain your intentions to people who are actively committed to misunderstanding you. You waste hours of sleep trying to prove your loyalty, your kindness, and your worth to individuals who have already decided to view you as the villain. You continuously overgive your time, your energy, and your finite emotional resources to takers who don't even have a mechanism to appreciate them, people who only know how to drain you until you are completely empty. You look at your endless tolerance of disrespect, your quick forgiveness without any actual repair, and your habit of letting people walk all over you, and you call it compassion. You tell yourself you are a peacemaker, that you are preserving harmony in your family, your relationship, or your friend group. But the brutal, unvarnished reality is that you aren't keeping the peace at all. You are actively funding, enabling, and financing someone else's toxic dysfunction at the direct expense of your own sanity. The life-changing breakthrough finally arrives when the cost of maintaining this performance becomes too heavy for your nervous system to bear. The constant overextension completely drains your mental clarity, slowly erodes your self-respect, and leaves you trapped in a prison of deep, simmering resentment that you desperately try to disguise as patience. You look in the mirror and realize that by making yourself infinitely accessible, you have taught everyone around you that they can mistreat you without facing a single consequence. That is the exact moment the illusion shatters, and you are forced to confront a hard, cold, psychological truth that changes the trajectory of your entire existence. Compassion without discernment is nothing but a slow, glorified form of self-destruction. You realize that you cannot heal a person by allowing them to destroy you, and that real kindness doesn't mean standing still while someone else uses your soul as a doormat. True, unshakable power begins the exact second the empath stops viewing the word no as a moral crime and starts viewing emotional distance as an absolute medical necessity for survival. For decades, you have been conditioned to feel a wave of intense guilt whenever you protect yourself, as if drawing a line makes you a bad person. But the moment you wake up, you completely stop trying to fix, save, or heal people who are deeply, structurally invested in remaining victims. You finally realize that some people don't actually want solutions to their problems. They just want an endless supply of your energy to fuel their drama. You stop throwing your life jacket to people who are entirely committed to drowning, and you make the massive, life-changing distinction between mere access and actual intimacy. You realize that just because someone has your phone number, lives in your house, or shares your DNA does not mean they automatically earn the right to step into the sacred inner circle of your mind. This profound shift is often misunderstood by outsiders who see you pulling back. But let's be completely direct. This isn't the empath becoming cold, bitter, or unfeeling. It is the empath becoming ruthlessly precise. There is a massive critical difference between the two. Coldness is a trauma response that completely shuts down your feelings, builds a brick wall around your heart, and disconnects you from humanity out of pure fear. Precision, on the other hand, keeps your heart wide open, but directs your beautiful emotional energy with laser-focused wisdom. It means you no longer pour your sacred light into bottomless pits. You become highly selective, reserving your deep empathy exclusively for environments and relationships where truth, safety, and mutual reciprocity actually exist. You stop giving away your presence indiscriminately, recognizing that your attention is a high-value resource that must be fiercely protected. When an empath finally steps into this level of clarity and builds rock-solid boundaries, a fascinating psychological phenomenon happens. Manipulative, toxic people instantly lose interest in you and disappear. Why? Because exploitation depends entirely on predictability. A manipulator relies on a specific script where they pull a lever of guilt and you automatically over-explain, apologize, and sacrifice your own comfort to keep them happy. The moment you stand in your precision and refuse to read your lines, their entire script breaks, and they lose all control over the dynamic. They will often lash out, accuse you of changing, or call you selfish. But you must remember this truth. Your personal growth will always look like a direct threat to people who were benefiting from your lack of boundaries. You stop letting their discomfort dictate your worth, because you finally understand that true peace isn't about keeping everyone around you comfortable. It is about boldly refusing to participate in your own destruction. A mature, integrated empath is, without a doubt, the single most dangerous person in the room for a manipulator, a narcissist, or a psychological player. To a toxic person, an untrained empath is the ultimate prize. But a conscious empath is an absolute nightmare. Why? Because they have completely stopped making the fatal mistake of projecting their own good intentions, high conscience, and deep integrity onto individuals who simply do not possess those traits. Early in life, you assume that because you operated with honesty, empathy, and a desire for harmony, everyone else did too. You made excuses for terrible behavior by trying to find the wounded child inside the predator. But once you cross into maturity, that naivete vanishes. You look at people exactly as they are, not as you wish they were, and you accept the hard reality that some people are entirely committed to deception, exploitation, and surface-level impression management. Because of this profound shift in perception, you completely stop engaging in the exhausting, low-level drama of arguing when you sense a lie or a hidden agenda. Younger empaths feel an overwhelming urge to confront deceptions, to expose the truth, or to desperately defend their own instincts to people who pretend not to understand. A mature empath doesn't waste a single breath trying to make blind people see or forcing a dishonest person to admit to their behavior. They realize that when someone is committed to a lie, an argument is just a trap designed to drain their energy. Instead of fighting, screaming, or over-explaining, the mature empath does something terrifyingly quiet. They simply observe the behavior, register the pattern of data, and instantly adjust their position in silence. They don't seek consensus, they don't demand an apology, and they don't ask for permission to walk away or pull back their energy. They just move differently, shifting their boundaries without a single ounce of theatrical drama. This total refusal to play the emotional game creates an incredibly heavy, grounded presence that commands a room without saying a word. It is a quiet authority born from psychological clarity, not dominant ego. You find yourself speaking far less but meaning infinitely more, because you are no longer using words to manipulate an outcome or beg for validation. You become entirely unbothered, detached and cold toward tactics that used to paralyze you. False praise bounces off you because you see the hidden agenda behind the compliment. Guilt trips no longer hook your conscience because you recognize them as cheap control mechanisms. And gaslighting completely fails because you trust your own reality with absolute certainty. You are no longer hunting for universal approval or terrified of being disliked, which means the psychological levers of manipulation completely stop working on you. When you reach a point where you can easily tolerate being actively misunderstood, slandered, or disliked by toxic people without ever betraying your own inner truth, you cross an invisible threshold. You become completely, permanently impossible to control. Real, unshakable strength has absolutely nothing to do with building a cold, defensive armor around your heart or pretending that you no longer care about anything. A lot of people mistake emotional numbness for power, assuming that the only way a highly sensitive person can survive this world is by becoming detached, unreachable, and completely closed off. But that isn't strength. That is just a frozen trauma response, a brittle wall that keeps you trapped in a prison of your own fear. True, unbreakable power comes from the exact opposite direction. It comes from total internal integration. Integration means you finally stop fighting yourself. It means you stop trying to slice off your deep feelings or suppress your intense sensitivity just to fit into a world that doesn't understand you. It is the process of bringing your deep intuition, your raw emotional depth, and your sharp intellect together into a single unified force, turning what used to be chaotic emotional static into a beautifully focused, laser-sharp clarity. The ultimate breakthrough happens the exact moment you make a definitive, non-negotiable decision in your gut that the heavy, agonizing cost of self-abandonment is infinitely worse than the cost of being misunderstood by other people. For the first half of your life, you were terrified of being disliked, misjudged, or cast out. So you willingly mutilated your own truth just to keep everyone else comfortable. You stayed quiet when your radar screamed that something was wrong. You shrank your presence so you wouldn't intimidate anyone. And you edited your personality down to a digestible, safe version for people who only valued you when you were small. But when you finally realize that people-pleasing is just a slow, painful way of erasing your own existence, the exhausting survival game instantly ends, and true, unshakable psychological sovereignty begins. You realize that it is not your job to manage other people's perceptions of you, and that if standing in your truth makes them uncomfortable, That is entirely their baggage to carry, not yours. Once you step into this sovereign headspace, your inner truth and your outer actions finally, beautifully line up with absolute precision. You stop saying yes when your soul is screaming no. You stop smiling at disrespect, and you stop pretending to be okay with dynamics that actively deplete your spirit. This complete alignment between what you know inside and how you act outside carries a massive, undeniable gravity that everyone around you can instantly feel. You no longer have to announce your boundaries or yell to get your point across, because authenticity has its own heavy weight. People intuitively sense that they are dealing with someone who is completely grounded, someone who cannot be swayed by cheap guilt trips, flattery, or social pressure. You cross a sacred threshold where you stop defining your entire identity by the trauma, the betrayals, and the wounds that happened to you in your early chapters. While those painful experiences are a real part of your history, you fiercely refuse to let them act as the author of your future. You stop viewing yourself as a perpetual survivor of toxic people and start organizing your life entirely around the conscious choices you make today. Through this profound shift, you awaken to a shocking realization that rewrites your entire past. Your intense sensitivity was never the actual burden weighing you down. The real burden was your unintegrated, untrained, and fearful sensitivity. It was the chaotic sensitivity that lacked boundaries, the sensitivity that absorbed everyone else's emotional garbage because it didn't know how to filter the noise from the truth. Your depth was never a defect. It was a highly advanced faculty that you simply hadn't learned how to command yet. When you stop fearing your own depth and start owning it as an elite form of emotional and relational intelligence, the narrative completely flips. What used to feel like a heavy curse that left you isolated and overwhelmed transforms into the very anchor of your authority, allowing you to move through a chaotic world with a calm, unmanipulable mind that belongs entirely to you. When you finally stop fighting your own nature and begin to own your sensitivity consciously, it ceases to be a vulnerability and transforms into a formidable, deeply disruptive force. For the first time in your life, your core traits undergo a massive psychological upgrade. Your deep compassion is no longer a soft weakness that toxic people can exploit. It becomes a fierce moral authority that commands respect and sets the standard for how people must treat you. Your sharp discernment is no longer an anxious coping mechanism or a hyper-vigilant radar. It matures into an unstoppable, elite level of social and emotional intelligence that allows you to read human dynamics instantly. Your radical authenticity stops being a risky social liability and becomes your ultimate liberation, a complete freedom from the exhausting game of social performance. You stop trying to blend in, stop editing your speech, and stop shrinking your presence to make fragile people feel safe around you. This profound integration marks the exact moment you break out of the survival trap that keeps so many highly sensitive people paralyzed for years. You are no longer entirely consumed by the heavy daily battle of trying to survive your own overwhelming emotions, your own racing mind, or the chaotic, energetic residue of the people around you. Because you have finally learned how to filter the noise, ground your nervous system, and protect your space with precision, you reclaim a massive reservoir of mental energy that used to be wasted on people-pleasing. You switch completely from a reactive state of existence to a conscious, intentional state of living, meaning you are finally free to direct your energy outward, to actively build, create, and shape your own reality. You stop letting the external world dictate your emotional climate, and you start letting your inner steadiness dictate the climate of every room you walk into. The ultimate beautiful irony of the entire empathic journey is incredibly simple, yet it is a truth that most people spend a lifetime missing. You do not become powerful by changing who you are, building an aggressive ego, or forcing yourself to become cold, hardened, and unfeeling. The world tells you that to survive, you need a thick skin and a detached heart. but that is a cheap imitation of strength. Real, untouchable power arrives when you finally completely stop hiding, suppressing, and apologizing for the exact parts of yourself you were taught to feel ashamed of as a child. It happens when you realize that your deep empathy, your intense emotional depth, and your quiet perception were never mistakes. They were the advanced capacities the world desperately needs. The moment you stop abandoning your true nature and boldly step into who you were always meant to be, you become completely unshakable. Because there is no force on earth more formidable than a person who is entirely undivided within themselves. Ultimately, your journey as an empath is not about learning how to survive a world that feels too loud. It is about realizing that your depth is the very thing that makes you formidable. The years you spent feeling exposed, misunderstood, and overwhelmed were not a waste of time. They were the necessary, heavy forging of a rare and calibrated authority. Once you stop treating your sensitivity as a defect to be cured and start embodying it as an elite form of intelligence, the dynamics around you permanently shift. You stop letting the world change how you feel, and you start letting your presence change how the world operates. Stand firmly in that quiet, unmanipulable power. Trust the precision of your sight, and remember that you never needed to become harder to survive this life. You just needed to stop hiding the extraordinary depth that was meant to set you free.